everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. We got all types of inventions, and we're going to get into really what the different cultures are between the North and the South today. Cool stuff to talk about. I think you'll like this. A lot of little mini stories today. All right, so let me put myself here in the corner. Beep. All right, so we're still talking about the Industrial Revolution. Yesterday we talked about kind of the big picture, like the steam engine had come out, which is kind of a big catalyst for the Industrial Revolution. Leads to this idea of manufacturing and making things with the steam engine is a huge commitment by the entire world, like using machines to manufacture stuff. America, no different. And we are really going to take the bull by the horns here at the industrialization process, and a whole bunch of cool stuff's going to come out of America at the time. One of the really cool things that's going to come out of America is created by a dude named Robert Fulton. He is going to create the steamboat, all right? Because when you have something cool, you slap a steam engine on it, makes it even cooler. It took them a while to figure this out, apparently, because they were like, I have a boat. I got myself a steam engine. Boat. Steam engine. Let's put a steam engine on a boat. And they end up with a steamboat. Now, that you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. It's a fundamental shift in human society, all right? Because prior to the steam engine being put on a boat, making the steamboat created by Robert Fulton, the only way of being able to travel, let's see if I got, here's a picture of Robert Fulton. The only way of being able to travel by boat is with sails. Now, if you're coming across the Atlantic Ocean, that might not be a problem. However, if you're in the middle of the country and you live up and down the Mississippi River, and you live up in, I don't know, Iowa, somewhere in the middle of the country, all right, and you want to get your supplies so you can sell them. So if you're growing cash crops, whether it's tobacco, we'll use Missouri as an example, all right. If you're growing cotton in Missouri, you need to sell that around the world, all right? The only way to get it since you're in the middle of the country is to sail down the Mississippi River. Mississippi River is crazy important in American history because it is the heart line in the middle of the country. So what they would do is they'd sell it down to New Orleans, which is at the mouth in Louisiana, the mouth of the Mississippi River, and they would sell it in New Orleans, and then they would come back. But here's the problem. Selling down to the New Orleans to sell your cash crops isn't an issue. It might take you a day or two. But what you have to do is you have to put a couple oxen on your boat as you sail down or float down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. Then you got to make it back to your farm states away. And what you have to do is you have to get your oxen out, and they go on the side of the river, and you hook ropes to your boat, and it pulls it back up the river. Or you disassemble your boat and have it pulled by wagons back up, and it can take months. Absolutely unenjoyable experience for everybody involved. Once the steamboat comes out, it can travel upriver. It's powerful enough to travel upriver. So while you wouldn't necessarily own your own steamboat, you would pay a steamboat captain to take your stuff down for you and come back with your money. So these steamboats can go 5-10 miles an hour. Absolutely bonkers speed for the time. So you can make it down there in a day now, and then you can make it back in a week and a half. I mean, the level of speed that the steamboat speeds up transportation is astronomical. Now, there were definitely some dangers with the steamboat. How's it powered? Is with a steam engine. So if you saw my awesome drawing yesterday, you have that ball, all right? Do not go make a steam engine. You'll probably die. It's extremely dangerous, all right? But it's like an iron ball with water inside it, and they boil it to make pressure to shoot the steam out, and it can turn turbines and stuff. Super simple version. However, if you want something to go faster, you know how you do it? You make the fire hotter so it boils faster, so it creates more steam and makes more pressure. You know it's better than going 7 miles an hour? 8 miles an hour. You know it's better than 8 miles an hour? 9 miles an hour. And so they keep trying to make it go faster. The steamboats are no different. They keep wanting to go faster. They put more fire, make it hotter and hotter and hotter, more pressure. Well, iron is very brittle. All right, it doesn't bend, or it cracks and explodes, making a massive bomb. So steam engines and steamboats were notoriously dangerous for just blowing up and killing everybody on board. You might be like living near the Mississippi River, working in your field one day, and then you hear boom! And then it looks like it's snowing in the middle of July. And you're like, what is that? And it's like cotton balls, but where a steamboat has blown up, carrying a whole bunch of cotton down to New Orleans. And so steamboats were notoriously dangerous because people kept trying to go faster. Human nature, especially tends to be an American human nature as well. And so steamboats were incredibly dangerous because they would blow up. But hey, you can't find a faster way of traveling, and people did it all the time. So much so, we started making man-made rivers in the United States. This is a man-made river. This is a painting right here, but this is in Rochester, New York. So, since you have the fastest way of traveling is a boat. Railroads aren't out yet. All right, we're going to talk about that. Railroads aren't out yet. The fastest way of traveling is a steamboat. So they make roads that are water, which is a canal, which is literally what this is. And so this is going through the center of town. I mean, they got water bridges. Like, it's not a bridge over water, it's a bridge over land with the water going across it. So this is what people would do to travel because this is the fastest way of getting around the country. We committed to this in the Industrial Revolution 100% to creating these canals everywhere. So much so, we create something in America that still exists today, and it's called the Erie Canal, and it's, so look at this, all right, see this picture. I want to show you a map of what we built in the 1800s that's still around today, and this is crazy. This is the state of New York, all right? The state of New York right here, like this is Manhattan, New York City. This red line is the Erie Canal. America built a canal that looks like this, that goes all the way through the state of New York. Now, there's rivers and stuff that it connects to at different places. So not every mile of this is man-made, but a lot of it is. And it connects all these major cities over here and connects to the Great Lakes over here. So now, and I'm going to show you another map here, all right? This red line is the Erie Canal. This is present day. It's still there. I mean, it's the same one from 200 years ago. So you can literally bring something in now from England to New York, and you can take the same ship all the way through the Erie Canal, through the center of America, hit these Great Lakes, go all the way through, all the way around, and end up in Chicago in the middle of the country from England. And things in Chicago can be shipped over to England. Absolute game changer. The canals were. So we just committed because it's the fastest way of traveling. This picture right here is actually a modern day picture of a tour that you can take. You can get on a boat and you can go to these different cities using the Erie Canal. So when I say it's still present day, it's still used today. However, the popularity of it, I mean, we thought this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. All right. Is having these canals and being able to travel at like 8-10 miles an hour. But then somebody's sitting around and they're like, got myself a steam engine, got myself a wagon, got myself a wagon, got myself a steam engine. What, I'm going to put a steam engine in the wagon? Well, how's a steam engine powered? It's by fire and boiling water, and the wagons are made of wood. So the first couple wagons burned down. So they're like, okay, how are we going to do this? They're like, well, how about we make the wagon where it doesn't burn? So they make the wagon out of iron. All right, with a steam engine, they got it in the factory, and it's a big iron wagon. It could roll back and forth, and they're like, woo, we made it. And they open up the doors and take it for a joyride, and it goes right out in the dirt roads and sinks right into the ground because it's like a kabillion pounds. So they realized very early on that trying to make a powered vehicle, all right, and you'd have to make the vehicle out of iron so it doesn't catch on fire, to use a steam engine, is really, really heavy. So there's a short-term debate here over how to remedy this issue. So the two, now keep in mind, if you're thinking about this leads to the train, yes, the railroad. They're like, do we just pave all the roads in iron so it doesn't sink into the ground, or do we just make tracks from city to city? Like, that was a legit debate. paving roads in iron. That's a bad idea. Bad idea. Multiple reasons. So they agreed to turn around and put these things on tracks to go city to city. All right. This is a picture of one of the very first railroads of the trains. This thing can go at about 18 miles an hour. Blows the canals out of the water. Railroad tracks, the tracks are a lot easier than making an entire river. So when the railroads come out, so for about 10 years, the canals were the peak of everything. Then the railroads come out and they're like, it's easier, cheaper, and faster to use railroads. Canals aren't a thing. Now, we still have the canals and we still use them for big shipments and stuff. We still absolutely do. But the railroads immediately are going to overtake the popularity of the canals. You see people like riding here on the back of it. I can't imagine with all this black smoke that would be in any way enjoyable for them. This is actually a modern picture of that same one because I say modern. This is probably from the 1920s that has been colorized since then. So this was it new. This is it probably after 100 years. Today is probably 100 years since this picture was taken, but it has been colorized since then. So this is what one of the very first trains are. Keep in mind, look, I mean, this looks like a horse and wagon. Of course it does, because that's what people know. That they're like, well, we can put wagons on the back of it, and it progresses. One of the biggest changes for the average American when the railroad comes out. Now, the railroad, when I say it comes out, so the very first railroad comes out in 1828. All right, so they're like, hey, we got a railroad. 12 years later, 12 years, right? By 1840, there are 3,300 miles of railroad track in America. We straight committed to the railroad. We're like, this is the greatest thing ever. So immediately the railroads take off. This helps, businesses transport goods. People can travel themselves from city to city safely. And there's a lot of benefits that come from the railroads. One of the things that affects the average person, as I was just saying, more than anything else, is the speed of communication that trains bring. Because trains travel day in and day out, back and forth between towns. So much so, this is when, at this time period, we have to start getting a very standardized system of time. All right? Because it used to just be every town had their own time. Like you walk out with your stopwatch, like the mayor at some point, you're like, we'll say it's noon now. And then everybody just runs their watch off the mayor's watch. Well, once you have towns and trains coming in and out, every town has to be on the exact same to-the-minute time, so the trains don't run into each other since they're both on schedules. So not only does railroads lead to time, let me once again stop getting off track. How it affects the everyday person is communication, mail. So if you sent somebody a letter, you basically in the 1700s, you hand it to a dude on horseback and he has to scamper off and go give it to somebody. States away. This is the Pony Express. That was it. There is no organized, super effective way of doing it from city to city. It might get there, but it might be months. All of a sudden, once the trains come out and they go to towns every day, the federal government says the train tracks are the postal routes. So mail travels on the train, and the government will pay the train companies to bring the mail from town to town. So where is every town's post office at? Is going to be at the train station. So you just go up to the train station, a couple times a week to see if you have any mail from you. And if you're trying to mail stuff out, you leave it at the train station and it gets put on the train and then it gets taken wherever it needs to in America. If you have a super small town, and this is really cool. You may have seen this if you watch any older movies. If you have any super small towns and the trains don't always stop there, this little thing right here of them hanging out, is that even it? Oh, I might be telling you wrong. But they would hang out the bags of mail, and they would go by and they would grab it off these hooks as they are leaving and then drop them off that way as well. So the train didn't even have to stop to drop and deliver mail. The speed of communication made a higher increase in percentage speed when the train came out than the internet did for mail. I mean, the speed of which it can travel is astronomically improved, and it is going to fundamentally change people's lives because the speed of information from one human to another drastically increases with the train because of the post offices. To give you an example, in 1790, there were only 75 post offices in the United States. By 1830, all right, that is 2 years after the introduction of the train, there is 8,450. All right, huge commitment to railroads and communication when it comes out. So it completely makes the canals obsolete, which just means they're not used anymore. They are still used. It's not like they're just going to sit there and go vacant, but not like the expectations were. Had the train come out before the canals, they would have never built the canals. So that's what the questions are here. Go through and pause me if you haven't answered all these incomplete sentences. All right. So the economy. America, I don't want to jump ahead too much. America creates a whole new type of economy. It's called the market revolution. It's revolutionary. Here's what our revolutionary idea is. Hey, if you get rich, good job. That was it. That was our game-breaking, crazy thing that we did, is we allow people to be rich. See, the reason that's weird is in other countries, if you became a super millionaire, you know who gets worried? The government. They think you might come try to overthrow them or anything like that, so they'd put all these regulations. They don't want you to be stronger than the king or rich or anything like that. In America, that's not a thing. So if you got to be rich, America says, as long as you pay your taxes, cool, all right? And they're like, so I can be like as rich as possible? And they're like, yeah, cool. That's called the market revolution. It's our complete embrace of capitalism. It's the free enterprise system. And so much so, our government's like, and not only that, we don't really care what you do. It's not our problem. Our problem is, the only thing that we have to do is deal with other countries, have a military, and tax. That's really all our government does. So y'all just do whatever you want. And it's called laissez-faire economic policies, which means hands-off. The government just let people do whatever they wanted. Here's what has happened historically when the government doesn't get involved in any type of business affairs. The businesses do great. They do fantastic. However, the people don't necessarily do great. What ends up happening is the owners and the upper level absolutely do awesome. The workers, which is the vast majority of people, absolutely do not benefit from that hands-off approach at all, because the entire motivation is profit. And so there is no profit in taking care of your employees traditionally. All right. That is the pros and cons of that. One of the things that comes out of this time period that America kind of commits to that makes everything much more effective is this idea of centralized textile factory. All right. So this is one of the first one. Laos was the very first truly centralized textile factories. Let's use t-shirts as an example. All right. Because we've been talking about cotton. I'll oversimplify it, say t-shirts. So where's all the cotton come from? It comes from the South. They ship it north. North takes that cotton, all right, it goes to factory number 1 and they turn it into like cloth. It gets shipped off to factory number 2 where they turn it into t-shirts. And then they take it from factory number 2 and ship it to factory number 3 where they tie-dye it and put some slogan on it and then ship it off all over the world in order to sell it. All right, it's going to 3 different factories. So traveling from factory to factory, it takes time, costs money, and all that. America commits to this idea of a centralized textile factory. Big mega factories where cotton comes in one side, the finished product t-shirt comes out the other side. All right. This is a centralized textile factory. And this is an example here. It speeds up production, keeps costs lower. Great for the owners. Now, when you're laissez-faire economic policy, I want to do that. Let me move myself up a little bit. Laissez-faire economic policies means the government doesn't care how you make your money. Leads to things like children working in the factories for 16 hours a day. It's a very dangerous situation here in the factories. And kids would work, people would get paid next to nothing. But, could it be worse? Sure. Could it be better? Absolutely. So the laissez-faire, the completely hands-off approach, does drastically benefit the factory owners, and it does put more money into society if you're looking at big picture. Historically speaking, if you look at it more detailed, even though there's more money in society with laissez-faire and a hands-off approach by the government, that money is really held by a very small percentage of people, and the lives of the if there really isn't a middle class, but the middle and lower class either don't improve or they go down, historically speaking. And I should also say, when the government regulation, which we'll talk about as we get closer to the end of this course and the beginning of the next course, absolutely is not good for the business owners because it's going to cost them money. And when that happens, they don't like it. But typically, government regulation does benefit the lower and middle class, historically speaking. This is just a random picture. This is actually from Lexington, North Carolina, where I taught there for years. And this is just a abandoned factory in that town. So it may not mean as much to y'all as it did to previous students I've had. All right. So what is different about the American economy than almost every other economy that ever existed? And specifically, how our government is going to interact with rich people. Answer that completely, and you can pause me if you need to, and we are going to move on. All right, we're going to talk about a lot between the North and the South. Two very different cultures exist between the North and the South, really from the beginning. From John Rolfe showing up with tobacco, it has changed. The South is agricultural and it's cash crop. The North, and we're going to talk about that today with the Industrial Revolution, had been kind of looking for their identity. The South already had been committed to cash crops because of the climate, the geography. The North is still looking for their identity. The Industrial Revolution gives it to them. The North is going to commit almost 100% to this idea of factory work. So factories and these huge cities are going to develop in the North. So people are moving from farmland to city living. Were there slaves in the North? There were, absolutely. But once urban industrialization came over, you can make more money. Keep in mind, if you're a slave owner, you're a rich person. All right, you can make more money owning a factory than you can growing crops. Also, because most of the crops that you're going to grow up north are food. All right, you're not going to grow your cotton. You're not going to grow your tobacco. It doesn't grow as well in the North as it does in the South. So as soon as industrialization happened, most of the rich people were like, yeah, I don't need slaves anymore. Like, I can make more money hiring people for a nickel a day and working in this factory where I'm going to treat them like garbage because they choose to than I ever could by owning slaves. So almost immediately after the rich people get rid of their slaves, they're like, oh my God, I owned slaves? Like, what was I mean, we were wrong. And so as soon as the rich people get rid of their slaves, the North says slavery's illegal. So almost every state in the North early on makes slavery illegal. And they're going to be very aware that the South still has slavery. And the North is going to tell the South they should get rid of their slaves. But we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But the North, so they're going to focus on industrialization. All right. Urban living, moving to the cities. So a lot of people who live in small farms have to pack up and move to the cities. The reason you have to move to the cities is because you have to go to the factory every day to work. All right. When you work at the factory every day, you don't want to travel 20 miles by wagon to get there. Not that you could probably afford one anyway as a lower class. So you lived right next to the factory. So owners that would own a factory would also own these really crappy apartments next door that would be called like tenements, and they are garbage. And I'll show you that here in a second. So the living conditions were absolutely horrific in the tenements. And I mentioned labor unions here before I show you some pictures. So laissez-faire means the government says hands off. We're not going to get involved. The only people looking out for the workers are going to be the workers. And what they're going to do is they're going to start creating labor unions. And we'll talk more about labor unions as this course progresses and then into American too. But here's the general idea of a labor union. if there's 2,000 people that work at a factory and you make a nickel a day and you're an unskilled worker, if you say, I'm not going to work, you know what's going to happen? They're going to fire you because there's probably 150 people outside that would love to have your job. All right. So boom, you're fired and immediately bring somebody else in. So you're always on edge about getting fired. But a union is if everybody there gets together, all 2,000 of you, and say, we're not working until working conditions improve. All right. That you can't replace 2,000 people. If they go on strike, which is the only real weapon that they have, labor unions, means we're not going to work until you meet our demands. That is very difficult for owners. And owners hate unions because unions can just shut down the entire plant. So it is a lot of these factory owners who are rich and have a lot of pull. They make it illegal. Like they go to the courts and have the courts make it illegal to be a union. So you have 2,000 people there, but y'all can't all get together and like decide what you're going to do. Just getting together and meeting, you can start getting fired immediately, like left and right. Boom, boom, you're fired. Because if everybody joins together, you can't fire them all. So unions have a strength in number, and they have to take it on themselves because the government with laissez-faire is not helping. So let me show you some of this stuff here. So this is kind of a timeline of the 1800s of some of the positive stuff that came out of the Industrial Revolution, like the first steamboat. There's a bank pandemic that leads to a depression, but it's not important enough in a standalone survey class to really go into it. Erie Canal opens. So this is kind of where we are in today's lesson. This picture is, now it's 1890, so it's about 60 years after where we are, but I really like this picture. This is Detroit, Michigan. This is what the cities look like. I mean, it looks just like London or any other packed in place, and tons of people lived in here in disgusting, awful conditions. Rich people lived in huge penthouses. But all the money in America, even though we're a very rich country with this, was held by a very small group of people. And everybody else was like dirt poor. So this is like a tenement, and this is more of a modern one in the 1900s, but like on average, like each window would be like its own apartment, and you would have like 7 or 8 people living in it. It would be awful. Tenements, awful little tiny apartments that workers had to live in, and they literally just made enough money to live in the tenement just to go back to work the next day. Not an enjoyable life working in the factories at the time. So the question is, why was the North moving away from farming and moving more towards urban environments with factories? So we have talked about that in detail. Answer that completely with 2 complete sentences, and we will move on here. All right, the South. So the Cotton Belt is a term for an area that runs really from South Carolina all the way through Texas, like a big swoop, and it's called the Cotton Belt. North Carolina, where we are right now, absolutely had slaves. All right, let's not pretend like Mr. Wagstaff saying North Carolina didn't have slaves, or it was any less evil than it was anywhere else. It was not. However, North Carolina really stayed mainly with tobacco, mainly because the red clay soil in North Carolina makes for a exceptional tobacco that is still even present day. While America doesn't smoke a lot for smoking tobacco, doesn't smoke cigarettes, a lot of the rest of the world does, and even today, the companies in North Carolina, tobacco companies, still make a lot of money selling tobacco around the world, as American tobacco commonly is referred to as the best cigarette tobacco on earth. But below that, it was cotton. Mass-produced cotton. You can make tons and tons of money off of cotton, and it was called the Cotton Belt. We talked about yesterday with the cotton gin. There's this need for slaves, and you can't get any more. You have what you have. So the plantation owners are going to hold on to their slaves with an iron fist at this point, and they're not going to let them go. So while the North is going to urban areas, the South looks very much the same. This is just wide open plantations. I mean, you can see some of the factories out here. This is probably the most industrialized as you're possibly going to get. This is a painting of a very stereotypical, good size plantation for cotton. Let me explain this picture to you. Yes, this picture is an accurate representation. You have lots of slaves working there. They're all working in the fields. There is one man, I guarantee it's a white man, one white man who owns everything here and makes all the money off of all these people's labor. All right. And they're slaves and they don't have a choice to do this. All right. This absolutely happened. This was in every county you would have a bunch of these. All right. The majority. All right, because I'm trying to find an actual picture of what the 1800s looked like agriculturally, like an aerial view, kind of like I had just then of Michigan, is not really a thing. The majority of white people, I got something floating around there, the majority of white people in the South were dirt poor, and they're out, yeah, they might be selling cotton, but they're working in their own individual cotton fields, and they don't own a slave because slaves would be incredibly expensive. So only wealthy people own slaves, which is a small percentage in the South. But if you owned one slave, you usually owned many, and it was for working in cotton fields like this. So so the majority of slaves, vast majority of slaves, this is their experience. The vast majority of white people's experience is not the rich guy that owns this, but being a dirt poor farmer yourself. Now, I'm in no way saying there was an incredible racism or that I'm not even going to pretend to be like, oh, I bet all those white people were like, that's so wrong. Like, not justifying anything here. Just the idea that, the idea that all white people own slaves is not true. The idea that a lot, percentage-wise, of white people own slaves is also not true. But it did happen. Obviously, every black slave was owned by a white person. It is not solely racially motivated. It's actually more economically motivated at the time. But when we get closer to through the course, we will clarify that there absolutely is racism. I think the misconception is that white people owned slaves and black people were slaves, and there was no differentiation of that. While the vast majority, 99% of black people in the South would be slaves, the white people, there's actually a very small percentage of white people who actually owned slaves. All right. Really important kind of side story here, but it's important to talk about now in the early 1800s. Starts talking about tension with slavery. As we talked about yesterday, slaves don't want to be slaves anymore. Second Great Awakening, they get more religious. So there's two very famous slave rebellions. There's one, this guy named Denmark Vesey. Tries to organize, he starts meeting with slaves, probably ones he meets from church or his own plantation, to organize a massive revolt where they go kill all the owners and take off, and I don't know what their final plan was, but it gets stopped before it happens. The fact that slaves are planning a violent revolt is horrifying to the rich white people in the South. Then one does happen. Nat Turner's rebellion. So Nat Turner, 70 slaves get together, and they have had enough. They go through to the owner's house. They kill the owners. They kill everybody in the plantation house mansion. Then they just go down the street, going to every house they can and killing as many white people as they can find. They kill 50 white people before the militia comes in and stops them. Now, 70 slaves killed 50 white people. What do you think happens to the slaves when they get captured? I bet you're thinking, I bet they all get killed. They don't. 5 do. They killed 50 white people. They're going to execute 5 slaves. Here's how they do it. Nat Turner is going to be executed. He's going to be hanged in front of everybody else. All right. Then they're going to, of the other, 69 people, they're going to randomly pull 4 names from a hat to execute those 4 people along with Nat Turner. And that's what they do. So the 65 slaves, they just murdered 50 people. You know what their punishment was? Go back to work. The reason that's important, 70 slaves just killed 50 white people, the greatest horror that the South could imagine. And they don't kill the slaves. You know why? Because you can't get more. That's how valuable the slaves are. They're not just going to execute them. They're just going to send them back to work, make an example of a few, and keep going on. Because you can't be executing slaves because you can't get more slaves. It's a very, very telltale sign about how that situation was handled with the desperate need of slaves and how irreplaceable the South felt like the slaves were. All right. So here's what happens though. After these rebellion, the owners are terrified that this is going to happen on their plantation. So what do? Do they treat their slaves better and, give them a more realistic work life so that they don't want to murder you? Nope. They put them on lockdown all across the South. Slaves start getting treated a whole lot worse. They have curfew. There's all these new rules that put on slaves so that the owners can micromanage them to make sure that another rebellion like what happened with Nat Turner and attempted to happen with Denmark Vesey doesn't happen on their plantation. So on top of everything else, now the slaves' lives actually get worse because there's all these new rules and regulations that just get dumped on them by their owners because they are absolutely terrified of a slave revolt. Because the owners look around. In a lot of places in the South, they are vastly outnumbered. If these slaves realize how much they outnumber all the white people, especially the owners, it is going to be a slaughter fest, and that is the absolute biggest fear of the South at the time, which is an economically and racially motivated fear. All right. So these are the questions here. If you will go through there and answer those in 2 complete sentences, we're going to be done for today here for part 2, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.